Hello, this is my video for our Viza assignment to record our explanations of the chapters we summarized. So let's start. Chapter 1. What is a test? A test is a tool that is used to measure one's current knowledge, capabilities, or performance regarding a certain domain. To be able to be called a test, it has to be structured, the objects have to be clear, the scoring has to be clear and such. Assessment and teaching. Assessment is, how should I say, a broader version of in a way testing. Assessment is something that continually happens. Something happens in class, you assess that, how good was it, how bad was it. Tests are only part of this. And of course, assessment takes place during teaching, so they go hand in hand. Informal and formal assessment. Informal assessment are usually comments or things you write on a test that are not scored in a way. Formal assessment, on the other hand, the easiest example would be a test. There usually is a grade or something of the kind that corresponds with it. Formative and summative assessment. Formative assessment is again very much like a test. It measures how much knowledge you have gained to that point. It's usually at the end of a semester, at the end of a chapter or something. Summative assessment, on the other hand, looks more at the process instead of the end product. So it's in a way more related to informal assessment. Norm reference and criterion reference test. In norm reference test, each test taker's score is interpreted in relation to a mean, median, standard, and deviation percentile rank. The purpose of these tests is to rank students. Criterion reference tests, however, are designed to give feedback on specific course and lesson objectives. Approach to language testing, a brief history. This topic, in a way, has been repeated over and over again during our studies, that in the old days it all used to be about writing, speaking, writing, grammar and reading, but since the change of communicative change came, more people and teachers want their testing to be more communicative and somewhat more authentic. Discrete point and integrative testing. Discrete point tests are measured different points, skills, and English, which are reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So in discrete points, all the skills are separated, like I just said, in the different skills and tested separately. In integrative testing, they aim to test everything as a whole. They don't see the, how should I say, language as parts. Communicative language testing, as I said, instead of more writing and reading related testing, it's more speaking related. It's more communicative, as the name says. Performance-based assessment, it's like the name says, you are assessed on your performance of the actual skill instead of a test. Current issues in classroom testing. Well, like I said, the most issues are again related to how everything is so one-dimensional in a way, more writing, reading, and test related, instead of how we should actually use the language. So, you know, it's inauthentic and not really realistic. Views on intelligence. As the days have gone by, the views on intelligence have also changed. Theories have been made that there are different kinds of intelligence. Back in days, people thought that you test how intelligent you are, but there are different kinds of intelligence. So some people are good at music, physical activities, and such. So not everything can be measured in tests that are written. So that's the way that views have changed. Traditional and alternative assessment. Once again, this is about traditional methods, so written tests, writing, reading, and such, and communicative methods, which we're trying to focus on more in these days. Computer-based testing, it's not new, but also not very integrated yet. Some advantages are the classroom-based testing, some individualization, and practice for upcoming standardized exams. However, it has also some disadvantages which make it hard to incorporate, like being able to monitor students cheating, no human interaction, and lack of open-ended questions. Chapter 2, Principles of Language Assessment. Practicality. So, as the name says, how practical is it? How cheap is it? Or how expensive is it? How easy is it to administer? Does it stay within the appropriate time frame? Reliability. So if two groups were to take the same test, then with the same the instruction, of course, then the results should be about the same. That means the test is reliable. But if there are many changes and variables, then it is not reliable. Student reliability. This reliability relies, as it says, on the student. So it's problems that stem from the students. I'm not feeling good today, I'm sick, or really something like that. Rated reliability. Rated reliability is related to how good or how reliable the raters are. So some things that can negatively affect this are having multiple scorers. So because I can approve of an answer and the other rater could not approve of it. So people could get different grades while they have the same answers. That's unreliable. Test administrator reliability. So when a test is administered in different groups, each group should have the same experience. So if one group has a silent classroom without too much disturbances, it would be unfair if the other group has a classroom that is very noisy and cold or something and such things. So the environment should also be the same. Validity, which means how well did the test measure what it set out to measure? How well did it measure the objectives it set? Content-related evidence or content validity is concerned how well the questions exercise measure the desired knowledge behavior of the test taker. So, how well did your test measure the capabilities of the test taker? Criterion-related evidence. Criterion-related evidence is achieved through the comparison of our own test to other tests. So, we have set our own criteria for our test, but to check if it is somewhat good or passable, we can compare it to other tests of the same genre. So, for example, if I'm doing a writing test, I could look at other writing tests and compare them and see how reliable they are in comparison. Construct-related evidence or construct validity is concerned how good standards expectations are that are expected of the test taker. So, if I have a speaking exercise or interview as a test and they don't measure intonation or accent or how fluid I speak, I mean, these are all important parts of speaking. If they don't measure it, then I mean, how valid is their test? Face validity is how valid does this test seem to the unknowing eye? So from someone that doesn't understand much, how valid does it look after looking at it a bit? Authenticity. So how realistic is the test? Do the topics have a relation to the real world? Are they talking about space travel and aliens that are totally unrelated, or school, or going to out to eat, or things that are relatable? Washback. Washback is closely related to feedback, as washback is in short terms how effective can your test be when giving feedback. So if you have a test and you are able to positively give feedback and the students are able to learn something from that would be washback. Applying principles to evaluation of classroom tests. When preparing a test, there are multiple things to consider than the 5 principles of practicality, reliability, validity, authenticity, and washback. However, Mastering these 5 will give you a strong foundation to start with, especially validity. So, are procedures practical? As I mentioned, practicality is about how useful, how easy to administer is, how cheap it is, time constraints, is it reliable? Okay. Does the procedure demonstrate content validity? So, do you measure the things you have taught in your class? Is the process phase valid and biased for the best? Are your students satisfied with the test? Is it valid in their opinion? Are the tests as authentic as possible? Some questions you can ask to see if the test is authentic. Is the language natural? Are items contextualized? And do tasks represent real-world tasks? Does the test offer a beneficial watchback to the learner? As your test question structures in a way where you can explain the topics you ask about after the test by elaborating and explaining the question or task. So if you can provide you can provide positive watchback. Chapter 3: Designing Language Classroom Test. First of all, there are different kinds of tests. To pick out which type or kind you're going to use, you first must determine its purpose. So why and what are you measuring or assessing? Language aptitude tests. Language aptitude tests measure how well someone might potentially be at learning that certain language. Proficiency tests look at how proficient you are at that moment in that particular language. Placement tests are tests that in a way gauge your level and place you, like the name says, in a certain group or level. Achievement tests are pretty much the tests we go through at school. They show how much we are capable of at that point, how well we have done. Assessing clear and ambiguous objects. To be able to make unambiguous and clear objects, we have to go into details. So the objective, make a sentence, is not clear enough. I mean, how long do you want the sentence to be? What is it supposed to be about? Does grammar matter? So a good example would be write a short sentence about animals using the present perfect tense. That would be a clear and unambiguous example. Drawing up test specifications. To make a test, you first need to make an outline which consists of a broad outline of the test, what skills you want to test, and what the items you look like, types and tasks and the questions. Devising test tasks. When devising test tasks, there are some things you should take into consideration, like, are the directions to your questions clear? Does each item measure the specified objective? Is the difficulty of each item appropriate? And is the language of each item authentic enough? Designing multiple choice items. While designing them, there are some considerations once again. Make sure your questions correspond with your objective. Do not make your questions and answers longer than they need to be. Make sure that there is only one correct answer and no distractor that could be viewed as correct. To make suitable multiple choice questions, you should measure your item against 3 indices. Item facility indices, item item facility, how hard the item is, the item discrimination, so how well did the question separate the good and bad learners, and distractor efficiency, how effective were the distractors. Although a regular teacher will not have the time to do this, these standards should be applied for tests that are going to be repeated and are of high standards. Scoring. When designing a test, you must consider how it's going to be scored. So let's say I have 5 different tasks. I have to know how much points each is worth. In grading, so the final step, so after tallying the points, how does it be represented? Do you give a point score from 1 to 100 or 1 to 10, or a letter grade from between F and A and such things. Giving feedback. There are many ways to give feedback, but the thing that we should consider most is to be able to form a positive washback. So when we're giving feedback, it's not just to let our students or learners know what they have done wrong, but the goal is to make them learn from their mistakes. Chapter 4, Standardized Tests. What is standardization? A standardized test presupposes certain standards, objectives, or criteria that are held constant across one form of test to another. The goal of these tests is to place people in a certain range by their relative ranking. Advantages and disadvantages of standardized tests. Some advantages are they are pre-made, so we don't have to make new tests every time. Scoring is easy in case of multiple choice tests, because we can use computers to read them. They usually have high face validity because they are very carefully prepared and have been used many times. The people know what they're doing and they have made a carefully made test. Some disadvantages. Sometimes standardized tests are chosen because they are simply easy to read and to apply when they are not the best option. They are not always the best option. They don't always measure objective directly because they are mostly in a multiple choice manner. They are usually multiple choice, so it doesn't. And some objectives cannot be properly measured when they are multiple choice, so they don't match. And not all people can perform well on these tests because, like I said, most are multiple choice and don't give any room for thinking. Everything is already laid out. What is it, A or B, for example? And not everyone can perform under these conditions. Developing a standardized test. First step would be to determine the purpose and objectives of the test. So the first, determine the purpose. So for what reason or goal are you making these tests? Secondly, find out what you must do to properly fulfill this purpose. This would be your objective. The design specifications. In this step, the features to be tested will be identified and tested by the design and associated tests. The third step is to design, select and arrange the tasks and items. The fourth step, make appropriate evaluations of different kinds of items. In this part, it tells you the importance of item facility, item discrimination, and distractor analysis in big standardized tests. As I said before, on normal tests that we as teachers would likely administer, these things are very hard to do because they are very time consuming. But if you're making a big standardized test, like the JGC test and such, because so many people are participating in this and these test formats are going to be used, we have to be much more careful and strict when making these tests. Specifying scoring procedures and reporting formats. The scoring system of a large standardized test should be scored accurately and reported back to the test takers and institution efficiently. So if you're making a test on this scale, you should easily be able to score them and report them, the results that is. Perform ongoing structured validation studies. So after making your standardized test, if you're going to keep using it, you have to update it and keep updating it. So every year or every time you use it, you have to look at the results. How did students do? Are these questions still up to date? Are they authentic? You have to keep updating or Standards-based assessment, chapter 5. So ELD standards. ELD, which stands for English Language Development. To develop English language, some standards have to be set and met. So, like it says, some standards have to be set. So we have to know when do we know when someone is developing language, when it is useful, when it's not. Otherwise, if you don't know what our standards are, we don't know what to strive for. ELD assessment. While people are still looking for better ways to assess ELD students because of budget constraints and people in charge having not much time, unfortunately, again, standardized tests are used. Teacher standards. Of course, if there are standards for the language, there should be standards for teachers. So, how good is this? We have to put standard teachers to see how good or successful one teacher is. According to Kurlan, there are 3 emphasized domains: linguistic and language development, culture and interrelationship between language and culture, and planning on managing instruction. According to TESOL's Standards Committee recommended that instead of teachers are held to a performance-based assessment, as this way the teacher actual behavior and standards can be observed. So this is a step that is very important, as it shies away from standardized tests and actually observes the skills in action, in context. So we don't get an idea of what they are capable of by using standardized tests. We actually see what they are capable of. The consequence of standards-based and standardized testing. Well, because there are so many standardized tests and standard-based tests, people more than actually, and these tests show how competent one can be in an idea, in theory. People, more than actually learning that skill or knowledge, focus on how they can pass these tests. That is unfortunately a bad consequence. Test bias. Test bias can form from many different things, from race, age, gender, or economical standing. When making tests, we should be careful not to accidentally offend one group. For example, if we give a story, we should not make it out that one group looks worse than others. For example, we should not put rich people on a pedestal and talk badly about poor people. Test-driven learning and teaching. As I said, because standardized tests are so common now, both learning and teaching are affected. So people are learning not English, but how to pass the English test. Teachers are not teaching English in general, so how to use it in daily life, but they teach you how to pass these tests. Ethical issues, critical language testing. Once again, the ethical issue is that because these tests in this current age, these tests, standardized tests, show how competent one is. People that are not good at these kind of tests or have talents that do not match these tests are seen as incompetent, while there is no way through. Because these tests, unfortunately, are one-dimensional. They only help people that are good at studying, reading, writing, and grammar. At least they have a higher advantage. And because of this, people that have talents outside of this are seen as incompetent, when in reality they are not. And because these tests are easy to use, easy and both cheap to use, this will most probably not change anytime soon. Chapter 6, Assessing Listening. Observing the performance of the 4 skills. Well, the problem, unfortunately, with listening is that listening cannot directly be observed. So we cannot observe how well someone is listening. And listening can also not be produced, unlike the other skills. I mean, if you write, I can see what you have written. If you speak, I can hear what you say. But that's unfortunately a problem with listening. The importance of listening. Some people forget how important listening actually is. except from when someone is reading something and then speaking. Listening is very closely related to speaking, because if you can't properly hear or understand someone, how can you reply? So a good speaker is usually also a good listener. Basic types of listening. When designing listening objects, we should take into consideration some things we do while listening, like determining sounds, determining the context of what we listen to, and interpreting messages, retaining important info, and forgetting the clutter. Then there are the 4 types of listening, which are intensive listening, listening for certain parts, responsive listening, so listening to be able to respond, selective listening, so listening for a certain part or certain information, and extensive listening, listening to get a general understanding of what we listen to. The micro and macro skills of listening. Micro skills are top down and more fine, should I say. They look into more fine details. Some examples would be discriminating between sounds, recognizing grammatical patterns, and process speech at different rates of delivery. Macro skills, on the other hand, are more broad and bottom up. Some examples would be in figuring a situation, distinguishing between literal and implied meaning, predicting outcomes of event, and predicting outcomes events. Some things that might make listening more challenging are cluttering, so attending to appropriate chunks of language, reduced forms, so not being able to recognize forms, like instead of do not, someone says don't, or I did not, somebody says didn't. If you don't recognize these forms, you can have a problem. Rate of delivery, so can someone keep up with the speed someone is talking at? If I talk slowly, everyone can hear me and participate, but if I talk a bit faster, it can be hard for people to keep up. Designing listening tasks, intensive listening. Recognizing phonological and morphological elements. A typical form of intensive listening is assessment of recognition and phonological and morphological elements, like he's from Florida is the question or the sentence that is being heard, and there are 2 answers that you can give, A or B. He's from California or she's from California. So being able to determine that small difference between he and she is the challenge here. Designing assessment tasks to responsive listening. Here we can, as it is responsive, so you listen to give an answer, we can, give a short story or context, and then give answers related to them underneath. So an example, how much time did it take you to do your homework, is the sentence that's being heard, and then the answers could be in about an hour. So the students have to listen to find the answer in the audio recording. Designing assessment tasks, selective listening. There are different tasks here. For example, listening clause. In listening clause, students must listen to a recording and simultaneously read its transcripts. In these transcripts, there will be some deleted words which the listener has to fill in. So if I read something and then listen to it, by listening I have to find the missing words and fill them in. Information transfer. In information transfer, one has to listen through something, get the information, and then use it in another way. For example, if I listen to someone describing a picture and I see 4 different pictures, I have to find the correct picture that is being described. And then we have sentence repetition. It's simply as the name says, you hear the sentence and you repeat it. We can say, yes, that's it. Design a listening test in extensive listening. Some questions to ask when designing assessment for this level are: can listeners' performance be distinguished from cognitive processing such as storage and association? As assessments become more communicative, does the test take the listener's communicative skills into account? Are the tests themselves valid and authentic? To keep this assessment, the scoring method must be specified. Dictation. In dictation tests, students listen to the recording multiple times and their goal is to transcribe it. So, as said, in dictation, students have to listen and transcribe what they have heard. We can judge it. So, how do we score or judge this? We can look at if they made spelling errors, or if there are words missing, or words are replaced with synonyms. Communicative stimulus response tests. In these tests, listeners must listen to a recording and then answer the related questions. So, as the name said, as I said, you listen to parts and then you answer your question. Authentic listening tasks. It is very hard to make fully authentic listening tasks, but there are other options that are not really called, assessment or tasks, but these things are very authentic. Some examples are note-taking. Nothing constantly takes place in the real world environment, thus it is authentic. I mean, these are things we do in real life. They require good listening to be able to write things down. Editing, it's close to dictation, as we are given a passage and then have to listen to audio and then see and then find the faults in it and correct them. Interpretive task, in which students must interpret a meaning from what they listen to and then answer related questions. I mean, this is pretty much the daily speaking and listening. Someone says something and you have to get a meaning from this and respond in a related manner. And retelling, students listen to something, could be anything, a story, an instruction, and then have to retell it either in full or to summarize it. This was it.